In May of 2025, PSG finally did the unthinkable. They defeated Inter Milan and lifted their very first Champions League trophy, the one prize people thought they were cursed to ever win. And this wasn't just any win. This was the crown jewel of Luis Enrique's time at PSG. He didn't just win Europe's biggest prize, he went all the way and delivered a treble, the very first treble ever won by a French club, and the second of his own career. But how did they actually get there? We've seen PSG dominate France for over a decade, but every time they got close to Champions League glory, they bottled it. Even when they pulled off one of the greatest wins ever against Barcelona, it still never got them over the line. So what changed? Well, that's where one of the most underrated managers of the 21st century comes in, Luis Enrique. No Messi, no Neymar, and no Mbappe. Sounds like a total disaster, right? Well, wrong. Believe it or not, this was the best thing to happen to PSG in years, because instead of just relying on a superstar or three, they finally built a team, a squad that actually played for each other, not just to feed the big names. And trust me, that made all the difference. But before we get into how Luis Enrique pulled this off, we need to roll it back and look at PSG's history. So, Paris Saint-Germain was founded in 1970. The whole idea was simple. Paris needed a football club that could rival Europe's elite. Crazy as it sounds now, before PSG, Paris didn't really have a dominant football team. So Paris FC and Stade Saint-Germain merged and PSG was created. They hit the ground running, winning League 2 right away and jumping into League 1. But things weren't smooth for long. By 1972, the merger split. Paris FC stayed in the top flight, but PSG got dumped all the way down to Division 3. But to their credit, they fought back fast, and by 1974 they were back in League 1 and moving into the Parc des Princes. The 1980s, that's when the first trophies came in. With guys like Safet Sušić, Luis Fernandez and Dominique Rocheteau, PSG bagged back-to-back Coupe de France wins and their very first League 1 title in 1986. But then came the dip. Things went downhill until Canal Plus took over in 1991, and suddenly PSG were a force again. With stars like George Weah, David Ginola and Rai, they went on a tear. 9 trophies in the 90s, 5 straight European semi-finals, another league title in 1994 and, oh yeah, the Cup Winners' Cup in 1996. Legendary stuff. But the 2000s, not so great. Even with Ronaldinho doing magic tricks and Pauletta banging in goals, PSG were basically stuck in crisis mode. A few cups here and there, but nothing to really lift them back up. By 2006, Canal Plus had had enough and sold the club to Colony Capital. And honestly, things just got worse. PSG were fighting relegation instead of trophies. Everything changed in 2011. Qatar Sports Investments came in with bottomless pockets and a dream. Suddenly, PSG weren't just buying players, they were buying superstars. Zlatan, Neymar, Mbappe, they became the kings of France. 11 league titles, multiple cups, trophy after trophy. Domestically, total domination. But in Europe, the story was always the same. No matter how much money they spent, the Champions League kept slipping away. They got close, remember the 2020 final? But they still couldn't win the ultimate prize. And then came 2021. That transfer window might be the best of all time. PSG signed young talents like Hakimi, Nuno Mendes, and Donnarumma, while also bringing in 2 absolute legends on free transfers, Lionel Messi and Sergio Ramos. The hype was unreal. This was supposed to be the season. Instead, total flop. They cruised League 1, sure, but they lost the Trophée des Champions, got embarrassed in the French Cup, and then, the killer, they got knocked out of the Champions League by Real Madrid in another classic PSG meltdown. Fast forward to 2022 to 2023. Sporting director Luis Campos tried to shape the team differently, bringing in guys like Vitinha and Fabian Ruiz, and even giving youngster Warren Zaïre-Emery a shot. But once again, it was the same old story. Galtier, like Pochettino before him, couldn't get Messi, Neymar and Mbappe to press or defend. Sure, the trio scored 58 goals, enough to win another League 1 and the Trophée des Champions, but the balance just wasn't there. They collapsed in the Coupe de France against Marseille, and Bayern Munich sent them packing in Europe. Same script, different season. PSG had all the stars in the world, but no real team. until Luis Enrique showed up. After yet another Champions League heartbreak, PSG president Nasser Al-Khelaifi had seen enough. He officially called time on the superstar era. No more Messi, no more Neymar, no Ramos, even Verratti gone. Instead of chasing names, PSG went for balance, signing French talents like Ousmane Dembele and Bradley Barcola. But the biggest signing wasn't on the pitch, it was on the touchline, Luis Enrique. Now you might be asking, why Enrique? Well, let's rewind a bit. After hanging up his boots in 2004, Enrique stepped into coaching. Fun fact, reportedly encouraged by Pep Guardiola himself. He started with Barcelona's B team, then tried his luck at Roma in Serie A. That didn't end well. One season, 7th place, and he was gone. Next stop, Celta Vigo. Better, but still only a year. And then came the big break. Barcelona's first team. When Luis Enrique took over as Barcelona's manager in May 2014, the club was still living in the shadow of Pep Guardiola. And let's be clear, that's not exactly the worst shadow to be under. Guardiola built arguably the greatest Barcelona side in history. But when he left in 2012, the identity of the team began to blur. First came Tito Villanova, who sadly had his spell cut short by illness. Then Gerardo Martino arrived, but his stay was brief and unconvincing. Neither man managed to stamp a new identity on the team, so by the time Enrique walked through the doors, the job was brutally difficult. Restore Barcelona's footballing dominance, but do it in a way that didn't feel like a cheap copy of Guardiola. Enrique's genius was that he didn't rip everything apart. He made subtle, almost invisible tweaks that changed everything. Under Pep, Barcelona's philosophy was about endless possession. Keep the ball, tire out the opponent, and eventually, when the gaps opened, let the attackers strike. It was patient, methodical, and suffocating. From 2014 to 2017, Enrique built one of the deadliest sides football has ever seen. Messi, Neymar, Suarez, the famous MSN trio. In 2015, they destroyed Juventus in the Champions League final to complete a treble: La Liga, Copa del Rey, and the Champions League. That was peak Barca, and Enrique was the man behind it. This was the MSN era, and Enrique's plan was simple but brutally effective. Get the ball to one of them as quickly as possible and let them work their magic. Sounds basic, almost like playground football. Give it to your best player and watch him win the game. But when your best players are Messi, Suarez, and Neymar, that's not just playground football, that's unstoppable. The structure behind them was classic Barcelona, a 4-3-3. But each midfielder had a distinct role that made the whole system tick. But his career wasn't just about club football. In 2018, he took charge of Spain's national team. For a while, it looked like he might rebuild them into contenders. But at the 2022 World Cup, they crashed out in the round of 16 to Morocco. A huge upset. Enrique resigned soon after. When he left Spain, the rumors went wild. Tottenham, Chelsea, the Premier League looked nailed on. But nope, to everyone's surprise, it was PSG who landed him. And honestly, that's when everything changed. Even though Luis Enrique's first season didn't convince everyone, it was already clear that something was changing in Paris. PSG comfortably secured their 12th league title, added another Trophée des Champions, and also lifted the Coupe de France after beating Lyon in the final. In Europe, they had one of their most respectable campaigns in years. Ironically, it was Enrique himself, the man who masterminded Barcelona's legendary comeback against PSG in 2017, who turned the tables and gave Barca a taste of their own medicine. Paris eliminated them to reach the semi-finals, where they completely dominated Borussia Dortmund but somehow failed to score. They hit the post and crossbar 6 times across the tie, yet ended up losing 2-0 on aggregate. It was painful, but it showed progress. Now here's where it gets interesting. PSG's transformation didn't actually start with new signings. It started with who Luis Enrique got rid of. Forget about star power. Enrique was done with the so-called Galacticos. And then the biggest shock of all, Mbappe, the golden boy, the record scorer, walked off to Real Madrid. That was the moment the old PSG died. And trust me, people were worried. Everyone thought, without Mbappe, they're finished. But Enrique had a different vision. He didn't want one superstar carrying the team. He wanted 11 players moving as one. He wanted 4 different guys scoring 10 to 15 goals each, rather than one man scoring 40 and everyone else watching. And to get there, he demanded total discipline. With Mbappé gone, Enrique could finally shape the team entirely in his own image. Instead of megastar names, he looked for players who fit his system. In came young, hungry talents like Désiré Doué, João Neves, Willian Pacho, and Kavica Kvaratskhelia from Napoli. His message was simple: nobody in this squad is above the team. I'd rather have 4 players who score 12 goals each than one who scores 40, he explained. It adds up to more goals overall. And the squad bought into that vision. Enrique's training sessions were famously brutal, inspired by his own fitness-obsessed lifestyle. He once ran the Marathon des Sables, a 155-mile race in the Sahara Desert, and he brought that same mentality into Paris. Everyone had to work, everyone had to press, and nobody was excused from defending, not even Mbappé before he left. Ousmane Dembélé summed it up best when he admitted, "The coach just kept telling us if you don't defend, someone else will take your place. So now, we all defend." The results spoke for themselves. Dembélé, once mocked for his inconsistency, had the season of his life. He scored 33 goals in 45 matches, more than in his previous 5 seasons combined. Bradley Barcola chipped in with 21, Gonçalo Ramos hit 18, and Désiré Doué added 13. Even Kvaratskhelia, who joined mid-season, managed 6. PSG no longer relied on one man. They had an entire front line capable of scoring from anywhere at any time. By the time the Champions League final arrived, PSG weren't the same fragile team of old. They had already survived a brutal knockout run, including a comeback against Manchester City and a dominant display against Arsenal at the Emirates. Now, standing between them and history was Inter Milan, coached by Simone Inzaghi. On paper, it looked like a close contest. Could Inter's experienced backline stop Enrique's youthful pressing machine? The answer was clear almost immediately: absolutely not. PSG were relentless from the first whistle, pressing high, moving the ball with speed and attacking in waves. Inter couldn't cope. Goal after goal went in, and by the end of the night in Munich, the scoreboard read 5-0. Paris Saint-Germain had finally done it. The club that spent over a decade being mocked for bottling the Champions League had finally lifted it, and not just lifted it, but completely dominated the final. Let's be honest for a second. Who actually thought PSG would ever pull this off? For years, they were the kings of bottling it on the European stage. They had Neymar, Messi, Zlatan, Cavani, Thiago Silva, even Mbappé. But no Champions League trophy. Season after season, it was the same story. Huge expectations, crushing disappointment. People literally started calling it a curse. And then, May 2025 happened. Passing, movement, pressing, defending as a unit. It was so surreal that for a second you almost had to ask yourself, wait, is this really PSG? The mastermind, Luis Enrique, the guy who once destroyed PSG with Barcelona's legendary comeback in 2017, had now turned the French giants into Europe's most complete team. He'd already won the treble with Barca in 2015, but this was different. This was history. PSG became the first French club ever to win a treble, and Enrique became one of the very few managers to lift the Champions League with 2 different teams. And then, in the middle of all this joy, there was something much deeper. Luis Enrique's daughter, Zana, tragically passed away 6 years ago at the age of 9. After the final, when Canal Plus asked him about her, he simply pointed to his heart and said, "She's here every day of my life, whether we win or lose." PSG fans held up a banner with her name, and Enrique put on a t-shirt from the foundation he started in her memory. It wasn't just victory, it was personal, it was emotional, it was beautiful. So let's put this in perspective. PSG went from being the most mocked club in Europe to treble winners in just 2 years under Luis Enrique, and they did it by abandoning the superstar circus and embracing teamwork, discipline, and sacrifice. The irony, Luis Enrique got rid of the Galacticos, and then became one himself. But now I want to hear from you. Was this PSG side the best version we've ever seen? Or do you still rate the Mbappé, Neymar, Messi era higher, even without the European glory? Let me know your take in the comments. I'll be checking them out. If you enjoyed this story, smash that like button. It really helps more football fans find the channel. And don't forget to subscribe with notifications on so you never miss the next big football breakdown.